Hello everyone, welcome back to Ferrigno Freedom channel. I'm Dante Ferrigno. I've been on a carnivore way of eating known as the lion diet now for 3.5 years, and it has changed so many things in my life. One of those things has been my attention to discipline on things in my life that I wasn't able to focus on before, and that included things like exercise. Even mild exercise like walking seemed like it was a bridge too far for me to do on a regular basis. I remember trying to get out and go walk for 30 minutes a day when I was the administrator at a retirement home over in Georgia. And it always felt like, one, it was a lot of energy to get up and do it. That was a big barrier. Another barrier was I felt like when I actually did it, that it didn't really accomplish anything. I would get out there for 30 minutes and I felt like I didn't break a sweat, except for the fact that I was out in the heat. I didn't really get my heart pumping any, so it didn't feel like I was doing much. However, since then, I've made walking and rucking, which is basically walking with weight on your shoulders, whether it's in the form of a backpack or what I wear, which is a 40-pound vest with 20-pound weight in the front and 20-pound weight in the back. That way, I'm adding some resistance to my walk. And I like to take my dog out and do that. And Sam really likes being able to go on those walks in the morning. So I'm glad I've been able to get consistent at that because he just loves it. But overall, what I've learned is that something that I used to really search for in my life was comfort and pleasure and relaxation. I mean, I was the ultimate Jimmy Buffett fan when it came to that type of mentality. I would think of happiness as being somewhere on a beach with a margarita or maybe with a nice tall beer. And that was my idea of relaxation and fun. But yet, even when I did those things, I always seemed to have something missing from my life. And it felt like I was going in the wrong direction. When I would look in the mirror and see my body, I realized I'm not doing myself any favors with this. And then when I started to have pain in my gut from the leaky gut I was experiencing, then I really realized I've got to do something different. And this diet is what turned everything around. But it also gave me the ability to appreciate the challenges that I face, to appreciate the difficulties. And that is something that is really hard to learn because so many times we want to hold on to those pleasurable moments and to focus only on being happy at all times. Well, you can still have joy in difficult circumstances. I can tell you from experience, it's not easy to wrap your mind around that. But I saw this video that was posted by the Academy of Ideas YouTube channel. It's called Pursue Pain, Not Pleasure. Why Comfort is Crippling You. And I thought it would be a great video for us to watch together. And you can get my reaction, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's go ahead and bring it up here.
In the 1st century AD, the Greek orator and philosopher Chrysostom wrote, "Luxury makes pains seem even harder, and dulls and weakens one's pleasures. For the person who is always luxuriating and never touches pain will end up unable to endure any pain at all, and also not able to feel any pleasure, not even the most intense." In the modern West, we have access to pleasures, comforts, and entertainments which kings of old could not have dreamed of. But with all this luxury, many people are chronically stressed, anxious, depressed, or struggling with physical debilitations. In this video, we explore the intimate connection between pleasure and pain, and examine why too many comforts and pleasures are contributing to modern man's mental and physical malaise. In his book, The Comfort Crisis, Michael Easter writes, "We lack physical struggles. We have too many ways to numb out, like comfort food, cigarettes, alcohol, pills, smartphones, and TV. We don't have to deal with discomforts like working for our food, moving hard and heavy each day, feeling deep hunger, and being exposed to the elements. But we do have to deal with the side effects of our comfort, long-term physical and mental health problems."
Man, who can't relate to that so far? I know there's a lot of people, especially in the United States and other first world countries, that are experiencing exactly this, because I think that was a big part of why I had so much anxiety and depression in my life for such a long period of time. And one of the things that Lion Diet changed for me was not only my physical health enough to where I felt like I wanted to exercise, but I began to enjoy the exercise. I began to enjoy the difficulty of the struggle that it takes to get your body into the shape you want it to be in. And I started to really learn to embrace that pain. But there's a part of me that still wants to get back to that pleasure-seeking principle, to get back to that comfort and relaxation that we can have when we have so much. So I think this is an important video that all of us are going to benefit from. Let's go on.
Understand just how comfortable and pleasurable our lives are, we can contrast modern life to the realities our hunter-gatherer ancestors faced for much of human history. On a near-daily basis, our ancestors walked miles to find water and forage food. They expended enormous amounts of energy bringing down large mammals, and regularly engaged in persistence hunting, which involved tracking and chasing prey until the animal collapsed in exhaustion. Once they made a kill, they would cut the animal up and walk miles back to camp carrying massive pieces of raw meat. Or as Michael Easter wrote, "Before we figured out animal husbandry and crop cultivation, we were essentially professional athletes whose livelihood required us to be physically active. Our ancestors didn't work out because nearly all of their waking hours were spent doing things that today we would classify as exercise. Studies show it was not uncommon for these hunters to run and walk more than 25 miles in a day. The numbers suggest that our forefathers in just 3/4 of a day logged more activity than most of us now do in a week or two, and they basically stayed at this activity level until they died."
Wow.
Along with intense physical activity, our ancestors endured mental stress without the comforting panaceas of technology, drugs, processed foods, alcohol, and entertaining distractions. They endured the elements of nature without modern housing, air conditioning, or central heating, and they dealt with sickness and infections without modern medicine. As their lives were difficult, often uncomfortable, and sometimes outright painful, our ancestors evolved an instinctual drive to take full advantage of the available comforts and pleasures. This drive was critical for their survival. Whenever possible, they would rest and relax, and through this comfort seeking, their minds and bodies would recover and find respite from the harsh realities of life. When rich food sources such as fatty meat, fruit, or honey were available, our ancestors would indulge to build up energy reserves, as they did not always know when their next meal would be. Our original comforts were negligible and short-lived at best, writes Easter. In an uncomfortable world, consistently seeking a sliver of comfort helped us stay alive. While we have inherited our ancestors' drive for pleasure and comfort, this drive evolved in environments of scarcity, and now we live in comfortable environments of abundance. The modern comforts and conveniences that now most influence our daily experience, cars, computers, television, climate control, smartphones, ultra-processed food, and more, have been used by our species for about 100 years or less. That's around 0.03% of the time we've walked the Earth. Constant comfort is a radically new thing for us humans, writes Michael Easter. While
There's no doubt about that being true when it comes to how comfort has changed us, especially over the past 100 years or so. And I know I've had my concerns with what we talk about with ancient man being on Earth for how long they've been. I'm not saying I join on any particular viewpoint on that, but I don't believe we've been here millions of years myself. But I think just thousands of years is enough time for us to look back and see that tribal man was living in such a way that they didn't have animal husbandry going on and they didn't have a whole lot of crop raising going on. They were kind of hunter-gatherer, that was the way they lived. So I don't doubt the hunter-gatherer mindset, and I don't doubt that we struggled a lot more. When I think about just what would happen if I lost power at my home here in Florida for a long period of time, how that would change things drastically. Being able to hunt food would be difficult in and of itself because there's so many people here right now. I could see the game running out very quickly. And with no way to store them with a freezer or something like that, we'd have to come up with ways to make our food last as long as we possibly could. And I think to myself, what it would be like to operate without air conditioning, without lights on at night, without something to be able to cook my food with easily as I do now, without the ability to freeze food. All of these things play a huge role in my thinking because I like to be prepared in case something happens and the grid goes down. I'm set up in case there's a 2 or 3 day or even a multiple week outage of power and things like that. But it's not an ideal choice. It's not the way I would prefer to live. But there's no doubt that if I had to live that way, it would be at least as close to difficult to what he just described there as these ancient men used to go through. And it's definitely something that we have lost. And it doesn't seem like we're a whole lot happier for it. I mean, when you look around at society and humankind in general, do you see a lot of happiness, or do you see a lot of people angry and missing something in their life? I think it's built into all man's experience to have something like that. But there is something about facing difficulty that does make you stronger. So let's press on and see what else he's got to say.
All right, so with the iTeal water machine and solar panels and extra filters, I have everything I need to take care of my family in case of an extended outage of water. This is very reassuring for my mind because I've been through hurricanes where it knocked out power and water for days at a time. I've been through situations where power was out for other reasons other than hurricanes. Sometimes it's just a day, sometimes it's 2 days, sometimes it was 4 days. You can only go so long without water, and if you want to make sure you have clean water, this is a great emergency kit to have. With enough filters, this kit could give me enough water for my family indefinitely.
You would want to return to the harsh conditions of our ancestors. The modern world is presenting us with new challenges which stem from the fact that our drive for pleasure and comfort did not evolve an off switch. It is practically insatiable. Living in environments of scarcity, our ancestors did not face the risk of overindulging themselves to a detrimental degree. But in our brave new world of abundance, overindulgence is a constant threat. We are cacti in the rainforest, said Dr. Tom Finnecane. One of the dangers arising from the clash between our insatiable drive for comfort and our world teeming with comfort is what Michael Easter calls comfort creep, or as he explains, when a new comfort is introduced, we adapt to it and our old comforts become unacceptable. Today's comfort is tomorrow's discomfort. This leads to a new level of what's considered comfortable. What's more, new comforts have moved the goalpost further away from what we consider an acceptable level of discomfort. Each advancement shrinks our comfort zones. The critical point is that all this occurs unconsciously. We are terrible at noticing that comfort creep is consuming us and what it's doing to us. Comfort creep is most readily on display when it comes to physical comforts. As one example, due to the comforts of cars and delivery platforms which make it possible to obtain any product or service we want or need without leaving home, increasing numbers of people are living a life of near total physical inactivity, or as Michael Easter notes, 27% of us don't do any type of physical activity at all. Literally nothing. Life is a sort of prolonged shuffle from bed to office chair to sofa to bed. This physical comfort creep is a major cause of the growing epidemic of obesity and chronic physical ailments that arise from living an inactive life with a body which evolved to require high levels of activity to be healthy. The human, simply put, was not designed to sit all day, explained researchers at the Mayo Clinic, or as Easter writes, in our pursuit of better living, we've allowed comfort to calcify our natural movements and strengths. Without conscious discomfort and purposeful exercise, a forceful push against comfort creep will only continue to become weaker and sicker. Along with the problem...
That is really true. You know, I often talk about on the channel how it wasn't exercise that changed things for me for the most part. It was being able to exercise. That was the big change. I mean, it was like 70-80% of what I needed to be able to get where I am now. But that extra 20% or 30%, depending on how you divide it up, definitely has to do with getting out there and moving, getting out there and getting some resistance against my muscles. And even as I've lost some of that in my third year on Carnivore, because I was working a job that had me kind of laying into it a little bit, I've gotten back to it lately, and it has been hugely beneficial for my overall outlook on things, the way I feel about myself, and just getting out and getting that early morning sunrise that I'm used to getting again now, and getting Sam out for those walks the way he loves. It's been wonderful for both of us. So there is no doubt that you want to get up and move, but the key for me was getting the right diet first, getting away from The comfort foods, which are convenient, which are easy just to open a package and put in your mouth, and you think, I'm getting something, and it feels kind of good because it feeds my emotional need to feed myself, or it feeds whatever it was that my emotions were feeling at the moment so that I feel a little better for just a few seconds. I usually feel worse immediately afterward when I would eat something like that, and in the long run, I knew it wasn't doing myself any good. So ultimately, I think you wind up at a lower level when you keep eating stuff like that. But it was the key thing that I had to change first before I could get to the mode where I felt like, okay, I've got the energy to do this. As a matter of fact, all of us are probably going to have a lot less energy early on to do these things than we will later on. It's a matter of making it a good routine. We have a lot of bad habits that we build up over a lifetime of living with too much comfort, eating comfort food, eating fast food, eating things that have been harming our bodies and our minds for well over 100 years, so much so that it's being passed on genetically now. So everything he says, I totally agree with. And this is a hard thing for people to wrap their head around until they get to that point. But I really like what he's saying here and how he's presenting this in such a way that it just cuts through our preconceived notions on the desire for comfort and gets us to a point where we can make ourselves stronger and ready for the things that life has to offer. Because life is full of difficulty and disappointment and heartbreak. And seeking comfort all the time just makes those disappointments and heartbreaks that much worse. And it makes the things that we should be enjoying that much less enjoyable.
Continue to become weaker and sicker. Along with the problem of comfort creep, modern pleasures are wreaking havoc on our mind and body, as pain follows pleasure like its shadow. In Dopamine Nation, the American psychiatrist Ann Lemke writes that one of the most remarkable neuroscientific findings in the past century is that pleasure and pain are processed in overlapping brain regions and work via an opponent process mechanism. Another way to say this is that pleasure and pain work like a balance. Our brain is wired to maintain this pleasure-pain balance in a state of equilibrium, in which neither the experience of pleasure nor pain predominates for too long. Whenever there is a prolonged or excessive imbalance to the side of pleasure or the side of pain, self-regulating mechanisms in our brain seek to reestablish equilibrium by tipping the scales in the opposite direction. When we overindulge in pleasure, for example, our brain follows our experience of pleasure with pain, be it physical pain or mental and emotional anguish. Lemke explains that, I tend to imagine this self-regulating system as little gremlins hopping on the pain side of the balance to counteract the weight on the pleasure side. The gremlins represent the work of homeostasis, the tendency of any living system to maintain physiologic equilibrium. Or as the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche observed in an aphorism titled The Goal of Science, what? The ultimate goal of science is to create the most pleasure possible to man and the least possible pain? But what if pleasure and pain should be so closely connected that he who wants the greatest possible amount of the one must also have the greatest possible amount of the other?
Wow.
That he who wants to experience the heavenly high jubilation must also be ready to be sorrowful unto death. If we habitually indulge in the same pleasures, we develop tolerance, and through a process called neuroadaptation, our brain becomes overly sensitized to pain. Not only do we require more of a substance or stimulus to feel the same amount of pleasure, but the pain we experience following pleasure becomes more severe and longer lasting. If we are too intemperate, eventually we reach a point where overindulgence in unhealthy food, pornography, video games, alcohol, drugs, or social media have tipped the scales to the side of pleasure for so long and to such an extreme degree that our pleasure-pain balance settles on the side of pain. When this happens, our drug of choice no longer gives us pleasure, but we are still driven to consume it to obtain temporary relief from enduring pain. For example, in a process called opioid-induced hyperalgesia, individuals experiencing pain who use opioids daily for over a month are at risk of developing a more intense pain condition than the one they were originally treating. Why? Asks Lemke. Because exposure to opioids causes their brain to reset its pleasure-pain balance to the side of pain.
You know, that's something that seemed obvious really to me for a long time. It was one of those things where you knew when you worked out that you would get a pleasure high, but you were hurting. You were like pounding yourself. So it feels like this made sense all along, but the way they're putting it here really drives the point home as to how our brains work and how it's so important that we don't constantly seek the easy route. You know, when I remember my son was playing video games at his very early age when he was like 5 or 6 years old, and he would ask me to take control of the game for him so that I could beat the boss at the high end of the level or whatever it was. And I would tell him, I say, that's the part of the game that makes it fun, is overcoming the challenge, overcoming the difficulty. But he naturally deferred to wanting to have somebody else do that for him so that he didn't have to suffer with the difficulty of not winning, of not overcoming. And when I look back on the way children for the longest time have been told that they're just as good participating without any score being kept. And even if they came in dead last or they didn't do anything when they were out on the field, that they get the same accolades as somebody who did an excellent job. This really sets us up for failure. It sets us up to be in pain all the time. And that constant seeking to avoid pain is actually bringing us into a deeper state of pain. And that's why I think so many people are so miserable these days. I mean, just look at what it's like going out into traffic. Have you seen people that seem like they've lost their mind when it comes to things that shouldn't be a big issue? Well, I think this is a big part of the reason for that.
To the side of pain. Or as Lemke explains regarding the effects of any pleasurable activity or substance we habitually overindulge in. The paradox is that hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure for its own sake, leads to anhedonia, which is the inability to enjoy pleasure of any kind. The relentless pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain leads to pain. When our balance is tilted to the pain side, we crave our drug just to feel normal, a level balance. The good news is that we can reverse the enduring pain that arises from overindulgence through abstinence. Lemke notes that in her clinical experience, 4 weeks of abstaining from our drugs of choice is sufficient, and that following such abstinence we regain the capacity to enjoy the simple pleasures of life, which do not tip the scales so far towards pleasure that they create an aftershock of pain. Recovery begins with abstinence, writes Lemke. Abstinence resets the brain's reward pathway and with it, our capacity to take joy in simpler pleasures. To help us in our quest for abstinence, we can utilize what Lemke calls techniques of self-binding, which involve intentionally and willingly creating barriers between ourselves and our drug of choice in order to mitigate compulsive overconsumption. Homer's Odyssey provides a mythological example of self-binding, in the realization that no man could resist the seductive sounds of the sirens, who lure men to death. Odysseus ordered his crew to put beeswax in their ears and to tie himself to the mast of his ship. Odysseus understood that when a compulsion for pleasure overtakes us, we can lose the capacity for voluntary choice. And so, if we are struggling with consuming alcohol, drugs, or sugary foods, it is best not to keep any around and, if possible, create obstacles that make it harder for us to purchase them.
Who on a carnivore diet doesn't know that if they live in the house with people who aren't joining them on this way of eating? That's definitely a difficult thing to overcome. It's something that I've had to struggle with in my 3.5 years. But lately, I got to say, it's been nice. My wife has been joining me for these past few weeks on a carnivore way of eating again. And she's starting to notice that pain she's had in her neck for many years. I mean, such bad pain that when she would she'd use the headboard on her bed to rub the knot that she has in her neck back there. And when she'd go over that knot, it would make a bump sound on the headboard that I can feel in my own pillow sitting next to her. And I would think to myself, that has got to be really hard to live with, be in that much pain all the time. And doctors have said they don't have any solution for her. But in just these past 2.5 weeks that she's been doing a carnivore way of eating, where she's been really strict, even more strict than the time she tried carnivore last year, that she's really started to say she's noticed a decrease in her pain. So by abstaining from the foods that she used to use to make her feel a little better for a little while, and ice cream was one of those big ones for her. It was a big one for me. It's probably a big one for a lot of people out there, that she's noticing a reduction in her pain by abstaining from the things that she used to use to get away from these things. But also, I think there's a reduction in the amount of inflammation in her body, and it's allowing her to exercise more. So it's been a real benefit overall to abstain from a lot of things. And I've been talking about this for a long time, how the abstinence from these things that I used to indulge in all the time, whether it was comfort food, alcohol, sex, drugs, pornography, whatever, being away from all of that has allowed me to appreciate things in life a whole lot more than I used to. So I think there is definitely something to be said for this. Let's go ahead and finish this up. I wanted to try out this new skincare product that I bought on Amazon called Vintage Tradition. As opposed to using chemical-based cream like this that I usually use after I shave, at least all the ingredients in here are natural. This stuff really does seem to go a long way. I like it. It's definitely soothing to my skin. Vintage Tradition. Might want to give it a try.
Vintage Tradition even makes products for the ladies. My wife loves the Pretty Girly Tallow Balm.
Because it feels really good. And it smells really good.
With respect to digital drugs, we can restrict our consumption by setting a timer and only allowing ourselves to indulge for a certain amount of time each day or certain days of the week. This latter method of self-binding was recommended by Nietzsche as one of the most effective ways to stop compulsively over-consuming a pleasure. In his aphorism titled Self-Mastery and Moderation, Nietzsche wrote, "One can avoid opportunities for gratification of the drive for pleasure, and through long and ever longer periods of non-gratification weaken it and make it wither away. Then, one can impose upon oneself strict regularity in its gratification, by thus imposing a rule upon the drive itself and enclosing its ebb and flow within firm time boundaries. One has then gained intervals during which one is no longer troubled by it. Once we have managed to cease overindulging in a pleasure, to further improve our life we can voluntarily seek out pain. For just as the pursuit of too much pleasure ends in pain, partaking in healthy activities that involve temporary pain tips our pleasure-pain balance toward a more enduring experience of pleasure. Or as Lemke explains, pain leads to pleasure by triggering the body's own regulating homeostatic mechanisms. With intermittent exposure to pain, our natural hedonic set point gets weighted to the side of pleasure, such that we become less vulnerable to pain and more able to feel pleasure over time.
I think that might play a big role in why so many people find taking a cold shower or a cold bath so rewarding. I've been showering without heat now for several weeks, and I noticed that first shock when I step in is a bit of a pain type of response, but then I grow to enjoy it, and it actually feels better by the time I'm done. So it is amazing how much these little pleasures can overcome us, especially things like the new norm of binge watching series on television, something Katie and I have to be careful not to do because we really get into certain shows. Like lately we've been watching Bosch on the Amazon Prime network, and that's kind of held our attention because he's like a modern day superhero, and it's so rare to see a well-written story on a television show these days where there's no message being crammed down your throat. And this show mostly does that, so we really enjoy it. But we have to really limit ourselves so that we don't overdo it. Let me know if you find yourself indulging too much in some of your favorite shows and how it makes you feel when you let an entire day get away like that. You might enjoy the story, but I think it builds up more pain inside of us as we think we're escaping from the pains of our life to watch these shows and these retreats from reality. And then we wind up feeling it worse when we've got to face it.
An obvious example of a healthy activity that exposes us to pain is physical exercise. Studies have shown that the positive mood that flows from the temporary pain of physical exercise even reduces cravings for unhealthy pleasures. Lemke notes that high levels of physical activity in junior high, high school, and early adulthood predict lower levels of drug use. Exercise has also been shown to help those already addicted to stop or cut back. Lemke references studies which show that cold water immersion triggers the release of neurotransmitters which improve our mood for hours after. Setting lofty goals and struggling each day to achieve them, or seeking out hard problems that involve mental, emotional, or physical stress, can also temporarily tip the scales towards pain in a way that makes us happier, healthier, and more capable of feeling pleasure. The self-controlled lover of pain lives a life that is far more pleasurable than his opposite. One's pleasures are both greater and less harmful whenever they occur with pain, wrote the Greek orator Chrysostom. The 4th century BC philosopher Diogenes the Cynic was such a firm believer that intentionally seeking pain was the key to a good life that he spent his days looking for ways to make himself uncomfortable. He rolled over hot sand in the heat of the summer, and in the winter walked barefoot in the snow and embraced statues covered in ice. He slept in a clay storage jar, which was referred to as his tub, and he sought out emotional and psychological pain by intentionally evoking the ridicule of others. He lived frugally, consuming the simplest of foods, and he sometimes went for extended periods of time without eating, a practice today we call intermittent fasting. Diogenes is recorded to have said that despising pleasure is the greatest of pleasures, and he claimed that by voluntarily seeking out discomfort he was able to enjoy his tub far more than the Persian ruler Xerxes enjoyed his palace. Many throughout history have labeled Diogenes a madman, but given what we now know about the intimate connection between pleasure and pain, Diogenes was a man far ahead of his times. "It is not that I am mad, it is only that my head is different from yours," Diogenes once said. In our world of abundance, in which an unbridled pursuit of pleasure and comfort is crippling minds, weakening bodies, and making increasing numbers of people highly susceptible to pain, we would be wise to follow the example of Diogenes and intentionally make our lives a little more difficult, a little more uncomfortable, a little more painful, so that paradoxically, we maximize our strength, pleasure, and joy. As Nietzsche put it, what we need is a bit of cynicism, a little bit of the tub. Or as the philosopher William Desmond wrote, "True pleasure, the cynics often contend, can only be had by scorning it, and by welcoming its opposite, pain. There will always be pain, and so rather than escape it, one should grasp the serpent by the neck, put out the fire with one's tongue, rush into the fray fearlessly, and fearlessly stare down the barking dog. That is, one should welcome pains as inevitable, love them, preparing one for the pleasures of the satisfaction that will come. Ponos, as both pain and labor, becomes the cynic's means for maximizing his pleasure. More paradoxically, pain is the cause of pleasure, and the cynics are a strange breed of ascetic hedonists, or hedonistic ascetics, or, rather, theirs is the hedonism of nature itself."
Good stuff. I didn't know it was going to end right there. But, I think this is very instructive for all of us who are on a carnivore way of eating or not. You've got to be able to let go of some of the things that you use to give yourself pleasure in this life if you want to truly be able to experience pleasure. If you want to get away from the anxiety and depression, one of the things about a carnivore way of eating is letting go of those things that you used to use for comfort food. I thought it was mostly about getting rid of the inflammation in my body that's caused by eating sugar and seed oils, and that definitely plays a big part. But this really explains to me why it is so spiritual in nature, is that you're starting to break free from things that are chaining you down and holding you back. And you're able to experience the pleasure in delayed gratification and not having something to solve all of your ills immediately. And when you struggle with those things, when you do finally overcome them, it feels that much better. So that's one of the reasons why I hit it every morning. 6 days a week, I'm out there rucking with that pack on. And on my 7th day, I want to, but I've made an agreement with myself that I'm going to take that day as a day of rest, because I also think we need to recover from those painful things that we do to our body all week long. Well, that's just what I think about it. I'd love to hear what you think about it in the comments. And for those of you who haven't For those of you who haven't already checked out my website, ferrignofreedom.com, I encourage you to go there now. You can see all kind of things there, like how you can share your carnivore conversation story with me and with all of my viewers here on my channel. You can also get merchandise like the t-shirt I'm wearing here and other t-shirts that I've made to help support the carnivore community. Every purchase you make does support the work I'm doing here to help people get healthier and happier. And everything I use to orient my lifestyle to this carnivore way of eating, the products that I use, including air fryers, supplements, salts that I use, kitchen utensils, all of that information is right there on ferrignofreedom.com. Well, it sounds like my wife's home because my dogs are going nuts behind me. So I got to get going, guys. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you next time.
If we pay extra, could we maybe get some grease or fat?